Christopher, what is the Nanny State Index? Can you kind of tell me what exactly it exists to do?
Well, it exists to compile data from around Europe so we can tell which country is the most nannying. And we define nannying as being sort of paternalistic intrusions into usually adult habits, not exclusively, but generally habits that some people think are unhealthy or immoral. The four main categories are food and soft drinks, tobacco, vaping, and alcohol. And we look very rigorously through all the legislation in 30 different countries now. It used to just be the EU, but we've now included a couple of others, plus, of course, the UK. And we look at things like, sin taxes are a big part of it. Anything that really impinges on the consumer, we're particularly bothered about. So it's weighted towards things that really disrupt the ability of the consumer to pursue their own tastes and preferences. So things like vaping bans, smoking bans, sin taxes, sugar taxes, alcohol duty, advertising bans, a whole host of things. There's more and more things come up every time we do the index. So, for example, we've now got the alcohol display ban. You're probably familiar with the tobacco display ban.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Ireland and I think Estonia have introduced the same thing for alcohol. We've got minimum unit pricing in Wales and Scotland, plain packaging for tobacco. I mean, the ideas are pretty endless. And the general picture since we started doing this in 2016 is that nearly every country, if not every country actually, is getting progressively worse. Throughout Europe, there's more and more of a paternalistic agenda in telling people what they can do. There doesn't seem to be much end in sight. And although you might think that the whole COVID-19 situation has drawn public health experts, attention away from these more trivial issues, hasn't made any difference. If anything, they've used the pandemic as an excuse to bring in new measures.
Well, indeed, that is a concern of mine. We've seen mechanisms like lockdowns, other COVID restrictions, which could morph into aspects of a future nanny state. Clearly, you don't want to be at the top of the nanny state index. You want to be at the bottom. But in defence of countries that intervene in our lives, Christopher, is there a correlation between nanny statism and public health?
No, there really isn't, and this is something that we look at every year in the index. We
but it doesn't
correlate.
Work. It doesn't work. All this bossing around.
It doesn't work at all based on the scores we've got. So Norway actually is a top this year, followed by Lithuania. At the bottom, you've got Germany. Germany not only comes bottom of the whole index, actually comes bottom under every single category of the index. Quite fantastic. Now, Germany is not a particularly unhealthy country, and Lithuania, for that matter, isn't a particularly healthy country either. Towards the top of the index, when you do the analysis and compare nanny state index scores with life expectancy, no correlation at all. When you drill down and look just at the alcohol scores and look at alcohol consumption, no relationship. Same with smoking. So we can find no evidence that this stuff works at the most fundamental level.
What about countries like Sweden? We've seen in the course of the pandemic that they've taken a different approach to COVID, which is possibly allowing individuals to sort of judge the risk. I mean, does that relate to where they are in the Nanny State League, or are COVID measures quite separate in terms of how we judge countries?
Yeah, good question. Not really, no. The COVID responses are quite anomalous, really. It's part of Scandinavia. Scandinavian countries tend to go quite high up in the index, which is bad, by the way. Well, it depends how you look at it, but I think it's bad. So, yeah, you tend to have quite a few Eastern European countries, quite a few Scandinavian countries. So you got Norway up, Iceland's up there. Sweden is kind of up there. It's not, by any means the worst country, but it's up there. So, yeah, no, you don't really. The fact that they've treated COVID in a completely different way is not reflective of the way they nanny people in general. The Scandinavian countries tend to be fairly paternalistic. At the bottom of the pile, you've got a mix of countries. You've got Germany, as I say, come bottom, have done for a while now. Czech Republic is pretty free. And then you've got quite a few Southern European countries, Spain, Italy, all do quite well. There does seem to be this tendency that Southern European countries are a bit more liberal, and the Northern European countries, particularly Scandinavia, but also the English-speaking countries, UK and Ireland, tend to be more nannying for whatever reason.
Well, yes, I've spent time in Norway, and it's very clear how they do it in Norway and why they're very high on your nanny state index. And it's sin taxes, isn't it? I mean, I can't remember how much I paid for a chocolate bar in Norway, but it was over £2. A small can of 7-Up, maybe £3. I mean, just eye-watering amounts of money. Don't mention alcohol. I mean, I think I bought a round for a few people, £30.
Yeah, you're looking at about £10 a pint in Norway. They have a sugar tax as well. One of the few countries that actually has a tax on sugar, not a sugary drinks tax like we do in Britain and a growing number of countries do in Europe. In fact, I think there's now 12 countries out of the 30 European countries we look at have a sugary drinks tax, but Norway actually has a proper sugar tax. And a couple of years ago, it had to reduce that tax because people were going to Sweden to buy their sweets. And there were big confectionery supermarkets on the Norwegian border where people would, it was worth their while. There was a significant economic incentive to make that journey. The same thing happened when Denmark brought in a fat tax, which was literally a tax on saturated fat and any product that had saturated fat in it. People were going from Denmark to Germany or to Sweden, and they were getting the Danish bacon and the Danish butter and all the things that Danes like. So this is one of the things about the nanny state. It's not just, it's not just annoying. It has significant impacts, up to and including kind of black market activity. But yeah, people will do a lot to get around these kind of policies, which suggest fairly obviously they don't really like them very much.
Well, that's right. And we know that prohibition didn't work in the early 20th century in the United States. And people used to kind of put whiskey in a teapot. Well, in Norway, they're going to be putting Coca-Cola into a teapot, aren't they? And pretending it's Darjeeling just to escape, censure from the cops. Where is the UK in your notorious league, Christopher?
It's actually down to 12th this year. The last few times we've done it, we started this in 2016. We do it every 2 years generally. It's been in the top 5 or 6 and moving upwards. The fact that it's dropped down this time isn't any reflection of the UK becoming more liberal by any means. It's just that a lot of countries, particularly places like Lithuania, Estonia, have really got quite draconian, particularly on alcohol. And also vaping's really under fire. The one good thing about the UK is it's very laissez-faire, very liberal on vaping. You even got organisations like Public Health England that are in favour of vaping. And rightly so, because as an anti-smoking policy, you can't really beat it. Unfortunately, not every country in the world has taken that approach. And so we include vaping as part of the nanny state index, even though actually clamping down on vaping doesn't further any public health goals at all. It runs directly contrary to them. So yeah, it's down to 12, but that's only because we've been overtaken by lots of other countries. I suspect we'll probably move back up again next time we do this because we got all this junk food stuff that Boris Johnson's introducing, advertising bans and telling shops where they can stock their chocolate, that kind of thing. So I wouldn't be surprised to see it move certainly back into the top 10 next time we do the index.
Well, definitely. I think your index is very important. And earlier in the week, we were talking about measures from the Chinese Communist Party to actually dictate to families how much gaming time children do online. And I think it's an hour on a Saturday, an hour on a Sunday, something like that, that you just will not be allowed to do gaming at other times during the week. That's the kind of brave new world of state control. And I think that's why we have to look at your index as the thin end of the wedge. Also, there's the issue about whether there is any science to back up these measures. I mean, you mentioned a ban previously on or a tax on saturated fats. Well, if you speak to the renowned NHS cardiologist, Dr. Asim Malhotra, he'll tell you that sugar is the enemy, not saturated fats. So a lot of these measures are scientifically debatable. But we can all agree, can't we, Christopher, that it would be optimum for the population to smoke less, drink in moderation and eat healthier food. So if it's not sin taxes, how do we achieve that goal?
Well, I don't really buy your premise. I mean, you're taking that from a very healthist perspective. It's not necessarily optimal to, for example, drink within the guidelines. The guidelines are incredibly stingy. It's like a pint a day. There's no reason to think that is actually optimal for any human being. It's certainly not optimal for me. I exceed that comfortably every week, and I would be less happy, I think, if I stuck within the guidelines. The guidelines themselves, by the way, are not based on any evidence whatsoever. So I think we need to be very careful about making health the be-all and end-all. We've seen this debate kind of writ large, of course, over the course of the last 18 months with COVID. It's about trading off risks versus benefits, but there are no benefits to getting COVID. It's an infectious disease. That's what makes it different, you see, to these nanny state issues I write about, in that there is a genuine, what economists would call a negative externality. There's this kind of neighborhood effect from me walking into a pub when I've got COVID. I'm going to give that disease probably to other people. The same is not true for me vaping or smoking outdoors or consuming sugary drinks or whatever it may be. At that point, public health just becomes pure paternalism. I don't think with the COVID restrictions, it is pure paternalism.
The burden on the NHS, Christopher, of obesity, the fact that so many people who have a high BMI are particularly vulnerable to a virus like COVID. I mean, many think we would have had a better pandemic, not that you can have a good pandemic, but it would have been less costly to lives if we were in better public health. I mean, COVID has been a big diagnostic tool in terms of sick Britain.
Yeah, obesity is a risk factor for COVID mortality. It doesn't actually make you any more infectious, however. So as far as somebody who's not obese is concerned, it doesn't have a great knock-on effect whether the obesity rate in the population is 20%, 30%, 40%. And actually, when people have dug into the figures, they found that if we had a low rate of obesity, the number of people who would have died from COVID would have been only very slightly lower than it has been. It's actually been used that as an excuse, I think, by the government. I think the reason that we've got this junk food stuff coming in, which I mentioned before, is because Boris Johnson was desperate to find a scapegoat for the way that the whole thing's been handled. And they couldn't find smokers as a scapegoat because actually smokers are less likely to get infected by COVID. It's not widely known, but a lot of evidence on that. No evidence about alcohol. But yeah, obese people, particularly morbidly obese people, are more likely to die from COVID. And so that became the scapegoat. And there was this narrative then that, if only we clamped down on obesity, then we would have had as low a rate of COVID deaths as some of the better performing countries. That in itself is empirically very, very debatable. And certainly the stuff that's being pushed through to try and tackle obesity, banning cheese adverts before 9 p.m. isn't going to make any difference anyway.
Christopher, great to see you again. It's been too long. Thanks for a fantastic contribution. Really fascinated by that Nanny State League table, and that is the Nanny State Index, the creation of Christopher Snowdon. There it is. Is it what? Can you actually buy
That's the last version, actually. I couldn't find the new one, but we have a new one.
How can people actually read it and have a look at the table themselves, Christopher?
NannyStateIndex.org. It's all there online. You can download the PDF. Go interactive website, everything. NannyStateIndex.org.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.